because I can't think about any other major that I would want to do, but I don't want to go to medical school. And a couple of them suggested research, which I didn't feel like I necessarily wanted to do. I think I didn't understand what it was, because when I thought of research, I thought of my high school science labs. And, I usually didn't do great on those. I didn't get the answer you were supposed to get. So I thought, how am I going to do research when I can't even get the right answer in my high school science lab or my freshman biology labs for that matter? But I started doing research in my sophomore year in the chemistry department at Wilkes, and then I took advantage of summer research opportunities, both after my sophomore year at Wilkes and after my junior year at Wilkes. One was at Lehigh University, and one was at Geisinger Medical Center out in Danville. And then I also, in my junior and senior year at Wilkes, did research with one of the professors in the biology department. And so those were a wide array of different kinds of research experiences that helped me to realize that research wasn't necessarily the equivalent of what I was doing in my labs. And so I liked that and thought that I would start working as a research technician out of college and decide if I wanted to go get my graduate school degree. By my senior year in college, I was engaged. And so my husband, who was also a science major, we were going to get married and move to the Philadelphia area where both of us could get science jobs. And I figured that I made a 2-year commitment to CHOP, to my boss at CHOP. And that was what he asked. Please at least stay for 2 years, because it takes a while to train people in the different lab techniques. So I said, okay, I'll do 2 years, and by then I'll know what I want to do. And I'm still with the same boss all these years later. And part of that was because I got really lucky with the boss that I got. And part of that was because the kinds of things that I was able to do in the job that I got were really, they were always changing. And I'm a person who likes things to be different, not the same all the time. So for the first several years, I did research on rotavirus immunology, working in the lab as a technician and as a lab manager, so overseeing our students and our ordering of supplies and making sure everybody's radiation badges got handed in on time, just all the lab maintenance type things that need to be done when you're working in a lab. And then it was in late 1999 that my boss said, I have this idea to start this vaccine education center. I feel like there's a lot of parents who are concerned about vaccine safety. And I think that the voice that's missing is the scientist. I've never done this before. And I know you're, working with mice at the research bench, but would you be interested in exploring how we can do this? And so I was really excited to have an opportunity to try something different. And for about 5 years, we did both. We did bench research where we were studying this immunology, basic immunology questions. And then we also were learning how to communicate to the public about science. And after we thought we'd do that for a couple of years, and then we'd go back to the lab. And what ended up happening is that we ended up closing the lab and growing the center, because the questions continued to come in. People continued to have other concerns. And so we just, basically learned on the job how to communicate science and think about things like branding and developing materials and making videos and movies. And so I've done that since my kid, the whole time my kids grew up. I now have a son who's out of college and living in Florida and working, and a daughter who's soon going to finish college in the next year to year, probably the next year. And she's going to finish. So, as an empty nester, I actually decided to go back to college when my daughter started, and I'm now working on my master's degree in communication. And I think both my current educational aspirations, as well as the experiences that I had in the Vaccine Education Center, really helped me to understand that science doesn't need to be done in a vacuum. There's a lot of opportunities for it. And I really value the basis of my education. Having a science background positions me to do a lot of things that maybe other people don't understand the science if they're trying to communicate and do public relations or make films that relate to science, or there's a lot of things that can emanate from that science degree that I think people don't necessarily traditionally think about. But we've worked with patent attorneys who, again, they need to understand the science, but they're working on the legal aspects of protecting scientific discoveries. We've worked with film producers and directors who are trying to tell stories that are scientifically accurate and yet engaging to the public. We started a classroom program, so we're working with science teachers and trying to work on developing curricula. We, as part of the film and the science classroom program, we created animations about how vaccines work and how viruses reproduce. And so we worked with graphic design artists and medical animators who are, using a love of art and marrying it with a love of science so that they can create scientifically accurate imagery and animations to teach people how science works. So there's just been so many different opportunities to intersect science with other aspects of things that people like, that I think I didn't understand that when I went and interviewed all of my biology professors. And I don't think a lot of them really had thought about that either, because most of them were teaching in colleges. And so that was another avenue that they saw, was you can go to an academic setting and become a professor or do research. But I feel like that's an important takeaway from my experience, is that the opportunities are vast and probably even not things that somebody might think about. So I'll stop there, and hopefully you all have questions either about something I said or questions that you already came to today with in your mind.
Thanks, Charlotte. For those of you from Northeast High School, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. This is Charlotte Moser, soon to be Master Charlotte Moser.
Still not doctor, yeah.
I think you probably know enough and you've done enough to give yourself the complimentary title of that. And she briefly touched on her education and her start to her professional journey at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. She started doing science research there, but eventually grew into the role that she currently has today, which is the director. I'm going to get this wrong. I got to look it up again. Sorry. Yep, here it is. Sorry. The assistant director, Vaccine Education Center at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And what she touched on is that as she went through her academic journey through high school and into college, is she didn't realize all the different opportunities out there within this biology, biochemistry, biomedical fields. And what you may have heard her say as you were joining is that she's got to work with so many additional professionals within this field, whether it's lawyers or artists or graphic artists. So there's a lot out there that we think students unfortunately don't hear enough about or know enough about, that this is the opportunity now for you to engage with a professional in the field who has done and seen a lot in a non-traditional pathway, perhaps. So I hope most of you have questions, potentially based on her own experience or questions that you have about science. So I'm going to mute myself again now, and hopefully you feel comfortable enough unmuting yourselves and logging or verbally expressing, your questions. However, if you do want to type them into the chat box, I will be monitoring the chat box and can verbalize those questions for you.
Who's going to be the brave first person? Come on. Does anybody have a question?
One of the students wrote one. Yep.
Oh, sorry. I was actually wondering, you said that you realize that science doesn't need to be done in a vacuum. I just was wondering if you could elaborate on that
Sure.
more.
I think that a lot of people have this misunderstanding that to be a scientist, you need to be in a white lab coat in a lab and not talking to a bunch of other people. People see science as not being a social entity. And so, in particular, a lot of people who are gregarious and like to, that want to make sure they have a career that's social, they automatically think that they shouldn't consider science. And I think that's a really unfortunate misunderstanding, because even if you're, and I don't want to say just doing research to mean to diminish that, but even if you're only doing research in a lab, you're still communicating and collaborating with other people around the world who are doing that kind of research, because everybody's learning from one another and building on that. And I think with the advent of technology, the world's become a smaller place and allows those kinds of collaborations to be even more frequent. But I also think that there are a lot of ways to be a scientist that don't involve wearing a lab coat and being in a lab at a bench. And so that is what I mean when I say it's not in a vacuum. You're not just by yourself in a lab. People don't often think about the fact that places like zoos and museums have scientists working at them. Um, so there's a lot of people who like to be outside and say, I don't want to be at a desk, or I don't want to be in a lab, but they don't think about all of the scientists who are out in the field doing field work, or like I said, at a zoo, educating people in that manner, or caring for the animals, or doing research, at a natural history museum where their scientific expertise can be used. The food sciences, where companies are developing, new products, and you need scientists who are putting together different, different recipes, if you will. That's all science-based. When I interviewed for my job at CHOP, I had lined up another interview that I actually never went to, because I got the offer at CHOP, but it was at a company that was doing research into smells, and so you think about the perfume industry or the makeup industry, or we often think about science as pharmaceuticals, but there are all these other companies that also need scientists on staff. And those scientists are very often interacting with other members of the company, not just their fellow scientists. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks, Charlotte.
Sure.
There's a question that came up in the chat box that I'll read from Abigail. And she says, so you are working on a master's in communications. Once you complete that, are you looking for a career change, or did you just want to expand your knowledge base? You seem to be open to change and expansion. So what are you looking to do with this?
That's a great question. I made a promise to Dr. Offit that I wasn't looking to change careers when I got my master's degree. I actually love my job that I do right now. And my master's degree is specifically in health and science communication. So it's not a general communications degree. I sought that out because I felt like it could really connect the dots for me, from some of the on-the-job learning that I did, to give me that formal background in the educational realm that I didn't have, when it came to communications. So I've really enjoyed taking those classes, and because I'm having specifically a science and health communications background, some of the classes that are required for that are things like technical writing and editing, and health communication journalism. And so we're really learning about communicating science in a lot of the classes that I take. And there's a lot of different ways even that science is communicated, whether it's colleague to colleague in publishing a scientific paper, But now there's a lot of scientists who have blogs who are explaining science to the general public through new media. And I think that the new media really has removed some of the, I think of them like a series of concentric circles of communication, because historically scientists were doing their research in their lab, and the only way that got out was whether they published and spoke with their colleagues, or whether maybe their company sent out a press release. But scientists were very often not necessarily directly talking to the public. And I think that with the advent of social media and all of the online resources, it's much easier to directly communicate with scientists now. So for example, during the pandemic, we started a page, covidvaccineanswers.org, and we have a page, a form on there that people can fill out and send in their questions if they don't see the question on the web page. And I'm the one who's usually answering those. So I'm able to directly communicate with people from all over the world who have questions about COVID-19 vaccines and couldn't find the answer somewhere else. So it's just a really cool way that I think the world has evolved to a point where it's made things like science communication important and very feasible.
Great, thanks, Charlotte. I'm sure those emails take up a lot of your time these days.
They are taking up a lot of time, but I feel like they help, you know, I like to help.
That's great. Yeah. Here we have received a few more questions via chat, specifically because sometimes the connections are horrible. People unmute themselves. But Morgan asks, I believe you said you initially started in research before you got the job and title you have now. Was it as hard as you believed it would be? I was also horrible at research labs in high school, but I'm looking into the biology major as well.
Yes, I think the issue with the labs in classes was you already know the answer, right? So there's already a right answer to get, because often those labs are set up to designed to teach you a concept and go with maybe what you're learning in class. What I found about research that I really loved and didn't anticipate was that I could be the first person in the world to learn something, because I set up my experiment and nobody else knew the answer to it. And we don't know if the answer is right or wrong. So you keep doing more experiments to learn more. And then you find your way through that. And so in some ways, it is harder, if you will, because you don't know the answer when you go into it. But it was that exact thing that I think for me, I really was drawn to, because it's like a puzzle. You're finding all these pieces, other people in the lab are finding pieces, and you're trying to put those all together and see what kind of a picture it makes. And there's people in other labs doing the same thing. So as you learn what they're learning and you try to make sense of that with what you're learning, it just becomes this really fun thing to do. I think the hardest thing for me was that science tends to move slowly, right? So you might learn something new, but it's a small something new and you need to build on it. You're never at the end. You always can have more questions. And so I can remember when I was working in the lab, my mom would, and I'm a first generation college student. So I'd go home and my mom would be like, you know, what are you doing? And I'd be like, well, I'm still working on rotavirus immunology. And she's like, you're still working on that. People don't necessarily understand that, you know, you're always working on a similar question, but you're looking at it in different ways, you know, and finding small bits of information that confirm what you already know or bring up new questions. So yeah, I think probably some of the things that were hard about research were also some of the things that drew me to it.
Thanks, Charlotte. And I think I can echo that as well. You know, I didn't necessarily know what research was until I tried it. And as some of the students heard me say, I switched from being pre-medical in college to going onto a research track after college as well once I tried it. And it was those small discoveries that, as Charlotte said, you're the only one in the world who kind of knows the answer to that for a period of time until you share it with somebody. That's very empowering and very exciting. So I always say to students that, you know, what I call quote unquote real world science is very different than the recipe scripted science that you might do in your science labs. And there's a time and a place for those, especially if you're developing yourself for techniques or to reinforce classroom content. But the real science is so much more blue sky in the fact that you get to ask questions that nobody else has asked before, and that can be really exciting. So I'm gonna come over here to some other questions here. What made you pick a biology major over other sciences that were offered?
That's a good question. So I originally was pre-med, so I felt like biology was the right fit for that. But even once I decided to change, I always really liked chemistry. And so that's why I got the minor in chemistry. But what I liked about biology was cellular biology and the human body and how it worked. And so for me, I knew that kind of researching in that field of human biology was where I would go. And you know, it's a weird thing because you can't necessarily, even if you think you know, and you have to try to make a guess, right, of which path you're going to go down. And I didn't like biology for all the um, things you needed to memorize. That's, I think, why I liked chemistry, because it was more of a puzzle and solving a problem. But I liked the content of biology. And I think that you just need to listen to yourself at some level when you're trying to make those decisions and be willing to change your mind. You know, if you take a class and you're like, I thought I would love this and I really don't, that's information and you should use the information, all the information, right? If you're in a class and it's something that just is so easy, it doesn't even feel like you're working, that's telling you something. And so that's kind of how I think came to where I landed. I can say that when I took the job at CHOP, I actually had not even ever had an immunology course, and yet I ended up doing immunology research. But as a technician, I felt like it was okay because it would give me time to figure out if I was going to go to graduate school, what I would want to major in. As it turned out, immunology and infectious diseases was a great fit for me, because I really liked the science behind that. But as a technician, if I didn't like that, I could always go do something else because I hadn't invested in a graduate degree where I was now considered an expert in something. So I felt like that what was intended to be a pit stop, if you will, of doing a couple years of research was really helpful because it allowed me to change course if it wasn't what I liked.
Yeah, and again, just to echo, that was a very similar experience that you heard about from me as well, where I took 3 years off after college. Thought I was going to go to medical school at that point still, but ended up loving research and going to graduate school instead. And I guess I became one of those quote unquote experts along the way, but then I felt the need to actually leave that part of my career and come over to PSBR so I can share my love and knowledge of science with others, including students. So, again, be willing to learn and adapt to a given environment. Even though I've always been in science, as has Charlotte, our career paths have changed multiple times throughout, and we've developed ourselves in a given environment or situation. So here's another question. Okay. Zahara, I hope I said your name right. I apologize if I did not. Wants to know, did you have any significant moments leading to where you are now? What did you know? When did you know you wanted to be a scientist? So you touched on that. Maybe you could just elaborate a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I think I always thought I wanted to be a doctor until I got to my sophomore year and decided that I really liked the science, but didn't want to be a doctor, and what else could I do with that? And then tried research more really as an exploratory approach, as my professors suggested. Do it and see if you like it, and found that I did like that. But like I said, even when I got my job at CHOP, I didn't necessarily know that I wanted to be an immunology researcher. It was an opportunity and an opportunity for me to have a job, but also an opportunity for me to learn and grow. Um, as it turned out, shortly after I started at CHOP, when I started at CHOP, my boss, Dr. Offit, had already created a vaccine for rotavirus that was in clinical trials. So they were testing it in babies. And our lab at the time was trying to learn more about the immunology of rotaviruses so that if that vaccine didn't work, we would know more about why it didn't work. But we were also trying to think about how we could make what we call a second generation vaccine. So another version of the rotavirus vaccine that might work better. And so in doing that research for a potential second generation vaccine, which coincidentally was never needed because the first vaccine worked really well, we actually worked with a professor over at Temple University to create a system of microencapsulation that we put the virus in. So right out of the gate, I was very quickly able to bring in my background in chemistry that I loved and marry that with this idea of human disease and solving issues around a disease that was affecting babies. Um, and so I would spend 2 days a week going to Temple doing chemistry research and then bringing those microcapsules back over to CHOP and doing immunology research by, giving mice those microcapsules and measuring their immune responses. And so I kind of got really lucky to be able to marry those two things. And then, it just went from there, learning more about the immune system and then ultimately moving more into science communication. So I don't think there was one moment, I guess.
Thanks, Charlotte. Mr. Cobra asks, how did your family react when you decided to not become a doctor?
My mom was fine with it. I had a personal tragedy as a freshman in college. My second week in college, my dad was killed on the job. And so that was very unexpected upheaval very early in my college career. And so, some people said, are you even going to go back to college? And my mom said, oh, she's going back. And quite frankly, I don't know what else I would have done if I didn't go back. So I did go back. My brother was in high school at the time. So my mom and my brother were getting used to living in our house with only 2 people instead of 4, which was very difficult. So, that was my freshman year. And then it was by my sophomore year that I decided I probably didn't want to go to medical school. So for me, it was this huge decision. And I remember, coming home to visit and wanting to have this big sit down talk with my mom to tell her that I wasn't going to go to medical school. And she was just thrilled that I wasn't quitting college or something crazy. She was fine with that. She understood what my reasoning was. Her thing at that point was just that she wanted to make sure that, especially as a female, I could take care of myself in the future if I needed to. She was this 40-year-old widow who didn't have a career and had 2 kids she was trying to raise at that point. So that was what was important to her, that not so much what I was getting my degree in, but that I was continuing on with the work and getting a degree at all so that I wouldn't be in a position like she was in at that moment. So yeah, it was okay with them that I didn't go on to medical school.
Great. And you've turned out to be very successful in your own right. So
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just thank you so much
Sure.
for answering. And also, how a lot of students, we all get pressure sometimes from our parents. So I just was wondering, but
Right.
it doesn't seem like your parents were pressuring you to be a doctor or a lawyer or anything like that.
No, they weren't. And, I think too, sometimes kids perceive pressures that maybe aren't really there because, as a parent, neither one of my kids went into science. And I can remember my son, who's my older child, saying to me, I know you want me to go into science, Mom. And I said, I don't. Like, I want, yes, Daddy and I are both scientists, but you have to do what you love because you're going to do this for longer than you've ever been in school. And so it needs to be fun for you. It needs to be exciting, something that makes you happy to get up and go to work in the morning. And I don't expect that to be science. And so it was surprising to me as a parent when he felt that I thought he should be a scientist because I love what I do. Because the reality is you have to like what you do. So it is a tough thing to negotiate. And I certainly know there are a lot of parents out there who actually have expectations for their students to, become a doctor or a lawyer, and it puts students in a difficult position. I would say find somebody who you can talk to if that's a pressure you're feeling. But on the flip side to that, I would say maybe sometimes just think if your parent really is putting that pressure on you, or if you just maybe think that they're putting that pressure on you, because I think there are both sides to that. And I think a lot of parents just want their kids to be happy and successful, but maybe don't always express it that way.
I think there are times where students put that pressure on themselves as well because they feel like they need to be, XYZ successful or something like that. And I know I put that pressure on myself all through college and even after college. And it really took me, struggling with some unhappiness, to realize that it is more, happiness and loving what you do is so much more important than feeling like you attained a certain level in your career or a certain salary level. I think Charlotte and I are on the same page that we all need to be happy with what we choose to do. And, I think like Charlotte, I can't be happier with my career choice to leave the science after doing it for 16 plus years to come over to this organization that I get to interact with students and talk science almost every day. So choices can be hard, but listen to yourself.
Well, and I would echo that to say, I've been friends with a lot of women who became doctors. And I think a lot of that idea of, just continuing to put pressure on oneself to get there. And then they get there. And I can remember being a mom who could go to my kids' baseball and dance and gymnastics or whatever it was they were in at the time, because I could alter my schedule to allow me to do both of those things. In fact, as much as I was moving forward in my career, there were other moms at school who didn't really even understand that I worked during the day because I was there for my kids. And for me personally, that was more important than how much the paycheck was that I was bringing home, or that I was, reaching the top of my game, because I knew personally that if I wasn't able to do the things as a mom that I felt like I wanted to do, I wasn't going to be happy. And so I very actively, and that fed back into that idea of not wanting to go to medical school. I very actively chose to shape my life to have a career that was intellectually satisfying, but allowed me to accomplish the things I wanted to accomplish in my day-to-day home life and family life, and felt like I was able to do that successfully. And I think some of my female doctor friends may not have felt like they were able to do that and struggled a little bit more. And it's certainly not to say that I think that women shouldn't go be physicians, because obviously, people need to follow their dreams and do those things that they want. And I certainly know a lot of women doctors who are happy and able to have their life the way that they want it to be. But I think it's just thinking about what those choices are. And then that can be difficult because it's easy to always, I think we spend our lives competing, right? Whether it's to get the highest grade on the test, or to take the most AP classes, or to get into the most prestigious college. And there's always going to be another competition. There's always going to be that. So you have to find where you're happy and then work to achieve that happiness. Not because it gives you the biggest paycheck necessarily or the biggest title, but that it allows you to do those things that you want. Balance the lifestyle that you want with the career choices that you want.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to move on from this, but that's one of the reasons why my wife became a teacher. Her mom was a teacher, and she saw that her mom had summers off and could spend that much more time with she and her sister. She was, done at 2:30, 3 o'clock every day and could attend all of these sporting events after school. So that was an intentional, and she loves teaching. She loves instructing and interacting and mentoring students. But that's, that was only a piece of the puzzle for her. And even to this day, she has her master's in education administration, meaning she could go sit for an exam to become a vice principal or a principal or even a superintendent one day. But she refuses to do it because that job requires them to work 12 months out of the year. And she knows that she does not want to do that. So it's having those goals, but also allowing your values and what you're valuing both in your professional and your personal life to come through.
But also not dialing back the goals, because if you dial back the goals to a point that you're not happy, that's not going to be the solution either. So if you see yourself as a female physician, for example, or a vet or whatever that thing is that requires a lot of schooling, as long as you always make decisions with your values in mind, you're going to find a place where you can be both intellectually satisfied and have the happiness that you want.
Perfectly said. And just one more anecdotal story. I had a friend in college who unfortunately I don't stay in touch with anymore, but I don't know if it was pressure that he put on himself or he received from family or just felt like he started the path. He actually went through 4 years of medical school. And mind you, that could be, hundreds of thousands of dollars to put yourself through medical school. And after graduating, what did he realize? He realized that he no longer wanted to be a doctor. So he didn't. He had a medical education and a ton of debt. But as far as I know, he did not practice medicine after that. So have those conversations with yourself or with those people that are your guardians or help you make decisions. Have those conversations ahead of time, just to make sure that your goals and your values are aligned. Mrs. Eckstein, I'm going to hold your question off just for a second because I know that I see another student question come through. Did you know how we can figure out, or do you know how we can figure out which careers will give us the opportunity to have a flexible schedule and have time to be with family? I found Google search not very helpful in this case.
Yeah, I think Google search isn't necessarily going to help with that. I think doing something like you're doing today, talking to people who work in the field, definitely helps. I think that you're never going to have the whole answer because jobs change. And I think this pandemic has shown how jobs could potentially hugely change, because I think a lot of us adapted to working online when we didn't before. But also carving out what works for you. I think, my intention to stay at CHOP was in part because I understood that in that environment, there would not be pressures on me to climb a corporate ladder as if I would have decided to go, say, to a company and work down the line. And when my daughter was born, she's my younger child. So I had my son and then I had my daughter. My husband and I decided that I was going to move to a 4-day work week, and that we could take the pay cut and do that so that our family lifestyle would be what we wanted it to be. And I think because I was a motivated, hardworking person who had already established myself with my employer, he was willing to be flexible with me and allow me to do that 4 days a week. And it was originally set out to be a 4-day week for a short while my daughter was an infant, and she's in college now, and I'm still working a 4-day week. So there are positions where you can carve those things out for yourself. But it's also actively making decisions along the way as you go through positions and see if there are ways you can make a position work better for you. But I think, you know, go with your gut in terms of what you like to get the kind of job that you're seeking, and then go from there to make adjustments as to how to find those flexible positions. Because you're not necessarily going to see somebody saying we're hiring a part-time, lab technician or whatever. But when you're at that point of looking for jobs for a lab technician, you can evaluate, what is this company? Is that an opportunity? And if you go in and you look at, 3 or 4 different companies, you might find that one's going to be a little bit more flexible related to that than another. So it's finding your way along the path as you go, I think. And I think that's probably true of any major, but I think that people don't necessarily understand it to be true of science, and I think it is. Something like becoming a science writer can be something, you open up your own business, so to speak. So then you're going to be making your own choices. Now, obviously, you need to get to a point where you have enough experience and you're a good enough writer that you can find those jobs. But it's taking each step along the way and then being flexible and learning new opportunities as you go.
Great advice. I'm going to take Mrs. Eckstein's question, but students, we have about 5 to 7 minutes left. I encourage you to have any remaining questions that you're dying to know the answer to, type them in the chat box, or please just unmute yourself. This one's is not necessarily surrounding careers, but definitely something that Charlotte is an expert at. Can you touch upon some of the controversy surrounding the COVID vaccine? I know that soon they are going to open it up for teenagers. And have you had concerned CHOP parents?
Right. So mostly the CHOP parents we've heard of are parents whose children are complex medical cases, and they can't wait for their child to get the vaccine. So they're the ones that we're hearing from. They want to see how to get their kids in line. Certainly, because these vaccines are new, people at all ages, stages, and levels of health and wellness have questions about their safety. We've been answering a lot of those on our webpage. Some people wonder, because they're new, if that makes them less safe. And certainly they've been through all of the testing that other vaccines have gone through, so we can be confident in their safety. And they've now been given to, I think we're approaching 60 million people just in the United States who've received the vaccines, and we've not had any major issues arise. So that's been good. I think the biggest concern for me is that there's an active, organized, and engaged anti-vaccine movement around these vaccines, who actually had a meeting last fall to figure out how to sow doubt about these vaccines and their safety. And so helping people to understand that a lot of the messages they might be hearing through social media or online may actually be emanating from that concerted effort to scare people into vaccination is probably one of the biggest concerns that I have. I mean, we've definitely gotten questions from people that lead me to believe wherever they're getting their information wasn't an accurate resource. And so I think that's been one of my biggest concerns, is that, there aren't safety issues, but people are afraid there are because of where they're getting their information, unfortunately.
Another question on vaccines just came through. Do you think vaccines, and I'm assuming, Diana, you might mean COVID-19 vaccines, will be mandatory?
I don't think, generally speaking, they're going to be mandatory. It's quite possible that individual employers might at some point decide to make them mandatory. We've heard a little bit about this related to nursing homes, because particularly those residents are at high risk for bad outcomes. It's an employer's legal right, is my understanding that they could do that. I think from where our standpoint is that we hope people can get the information they need and be able to make those decisions in a way that's comfortable for them. And I think the fact that there will be various choices for COVID-19 vaccines will hopefully help people who maybe have very specific concerns. So I'm really hoping that we get to a point where we can achieve herd immunity without using mandates. Unfortunately, there's a history of mandates because there's usually only a certain number of people who will get vaccinated if they don't have to. And the mandates were what helped us to kind of get to the end with some of the other viruses and vaccines that are out there and are mandated. But I still would like to believe that if we can answer people's questions and they're not, they see other people getting vaccines, that will be enough.
Let's hope so. We got about 3 minutes till 11 o'clock. Wanted to just obviously say one more time, thank you to Charlotte for jumping on the call with us today. Hopefully we can all give her a little silent muted round of applause. But with the remaining 2 minutes left, again, if there's anything else that you wanted to ask Charlotte, I'm sure she'd be happy to answer your questions.
Sure. Even if they're vaccine related, that's fine.
Well, I mean, I've heard a lot of people say that the vaccine was rushed, and this is my assumption. So maybe you can say if I'm on the right track. I just said to people, like, the whole world was working on it. And I think sometimes vaccines and scientific initiatives get held up because of money or political reasons. And this was like the entire world was working on it, and there was a lot of money behind it. And
yeah, there was a lot more money behind it. Definitely makes scientific progress go faster. I like to describe the process itself as normally it's like a train where the cars are behind each other in line on the track. But for this one, we did more of a multi-lane highway. So while phase 1 and phase 2 trials were being worked on, they were also working out some of the manufacturing questions and issues and making vaccine doses so that we could, shorten the length this way, but we were working on multiple lanes of the highway, if you will. And that's really another reason why we were able to get, from starting research to vaccines and arms much more quickly than we have with other vaccines. But definitely the political will and the financial support played huge roles, because we wouldn't be able to do a multi-lane highway if companies thought that they were going to spend a lot of money to build buildings and make doses of vaccine that they would ultimately have to throw away if the vaccine didn't work. So, the money played a big part in that.
And I know what you meant when you said, from the start of research to getting the vaccine to the public. Obviously it was about a year or less than a year, but there were 20 years of research prior to the start of the COVID-19 specific research. There was 20 years of research prior to that on mRNA vaccines or the development of. So this isn't like we just threw everything together within a year. This has been going on for a long time, and we took all of that knowledge and acutely applied it to develop a COVID-19 vaccine.
Good point.
So Charlotte, thank you very much for joining us today. I know your time is valuable and you're quite busy. So we appreciate you being here. And thank you all to the students from Gateway and from Northeast High School for jumping on today. We hope we can see you again in the future.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Have a good day.
All right. Talk to y'all later. Bye. Oh, she left. Oh, well. How you doing, David?
Good, Larry. How you been?
Yeah.
Surviving?
Surviving at best. I don't know. Getting used to this, but it kind of sucks.
It does.
For
it's not the
science,
same.
yeah, especially.
Yeah, we're doing what what we can, obviously,
Yeah.
in a virtual environment as well, but it's not the
Yeah.
same. I'm itching to get back into the classroom with my programming and, but you staying healthy?
Yeah, actually, I just got an email today from the district for, so I just scheduled my first vaccine for a few weeks from now.
Awesome.
But
I just got mine this past
basically,
weekend,
I could have
actually.
sworn I had it. I thought I had it before, but I
Really?
don't know. Yeah, I got tested negative. So
All right. Just some other
how about you?
illness.
Yeah, something flu, I guess.
Yeah, thankfully my family and I are staying healthy. My wife is a teacher here in Jersey, so she gets her second dose this weekend. I was able to get my first dose this past weekend down in Atlantic City. So in 3 weeks,
Well, how come you got it? So how did you get on? Like, what prior? New Jersey is doing better than Pennsylvania.
New Jersey doing better. There are some websites where you have to sign up and be on the 1A list, 1B list. This mega site down in Atlantic City, they were not taking qualifications to get the vaccine. There was a super high demand, obviously, for it. The first time I tried, they had about 2,000 doses, and I was 46,000 in the wait list. So this past weekend, we
Wow.
actually had about 13 devices between 2 households, phones, tablets, computers, laptops,
Oh my
all trying
God.
to get onto this wait list. And we got 311. So I was able to get one.
Wow.
But I had other devices
once
that
you
were
get-
26,000. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
crazy.
Hopefully you get you got the second one too already, or
Scheduled. No, it's
Yeah.
scheduled for 3 weeks, but
All right.
it's in the books.
that one's good. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Fingers crossed.
We're gonna be
Yeah.
at some of the other ones. I love this, and I liked her a lot. I like what she said.
Oh,
She wasn't
Charlotte's
the most
great.
exciting person, but she was like what she said was like spot on. Like I loved it. And we're gonna come to other ones. It's just the ones that are at 11 or 1 I can go to. That's why some I
Yeah.
do, some I don't. But just the scheduling thing.
Yeah, we'd love to have you. So if you need, I will be sending out a registration link. I think I'll hit you up probably the day before, and you can send that out to your students for the
Okay.
upcoming ones. I might just keep you on the list for all of them. I know you could probably only attend some of them, but
Yeah. Oh, that's fine. Yeah.
I'll keep you in the loop, and maybe your
Okay.
students could jump on if they're not in another class, or I don't know.
All right.
Just wanted to include you guys,
Yeah. Hey, appreciate it. Thank you.
of course. All right,
righty.
bud. Take care.
See you next time. Bye.
You got it.